Should I look at you or at the camera?
We just look right into the camera. Yes, thank you. This is Bruce Bawer, and I'm in The Hague on Friday, February 5th, 2010, with Geert, who is a member of the lower house of the Dutch Parliament. He is the head of the Freedom Party, one of the major parties in this country, and he is perhaps the most popular politician in this nation at the moment. He is also, at present, undergoing a trial. And I think that for many viewers who may not be familiar with what's going on, can you sum up what you're being accused of?
Yes. But first, maybe allow me to say that I'm very honored to be interviewed by you. A lot of people in Holland, at least in my circles, know about Bruce Bawer and all your books from while you were slept to surrender, and I'm very pleased that you're here today. Well, unfortunately, it happened 2 years ago that a lot of people, because of my movie Fitna and some other remarks I made about the Islamic ideology, made a lot of complaints against me to the police. The public prosecutor in the Netherlands said that they would not prosecute me because they thought I did nothing that was against the law. But in the Netherlands we have a provision in the Dutch law that is unfamiliar in most other Western states, that people can complain to a higher court if they disagree with that decision. And unfortunately, the higher court in Amsterdam overruled the decision and ordered the public prosecutors to prosecute me. So now they are prosecuting me for hate speech, for group insults, for discrimination of Muslims, of non-Western immigrants, and of Moroccans. So those 5 charges are being brought against me today.
Why did this happen? Why do you think that decision was overruled?
Well, I cannot really look into the heads of the judges in the higher court, but it was totally unexpected, both for me and also for the public prosecutors, who were now forced to prosecute me. Well, it's a sign of, I believe, political correctness, that you can say a lot of things about Christianity, about any other religion, but hey, don't really try to be critical about the Islamization and the, I believe, dangerous values against our freedom of Islam and what is happening in our free societies. Don't warn against that, because then, well, you get into a lot of trouble. And I believe that, well, the political elite today is not very successful in beating my party in a political way. So they are looking for different ways, and even though the judges should be independent in the Netherlands, I'm afraid that they are also vulnerable for the virus of political correctness and want to shut down anybody who says anything against this cultural relativism, this multicultural society, and especially anybody who is critical about Islam, whereas I'm more especially not only critical about Islam, but the reason I'm critical about Islam, because I believe it goes against our freedom and our own values, and this is what I'm fighting for. But the more popular I get amongst the people, the more people want to shut me up at the same time.
Now, for those of us who are not that familiar with the way that the judicial system works in the Netherlands, how, generally speaking, how will this trial proceed? How long would something like this be expected to go on?
Well, it can take many years. First, well, if you include possible appeals, and the appeals most probably will be there, whether I'm acquitted or convicted, one of the parties will appeal to the higher court, then to the Supreme Court, perhaps even to the European Court, so it can take years. But now we are in the beginning. There were already 2 sessions, 2 public sessions, and well, they are very saddening as well, because I asked a few weeks ago the court to at least defend myself, not only because of the freedom of speech, but also because what I believe that what I've said about the Quran and the Islam is the truth, and I should be able to defend myself and to establish that I said the truth. So I asked for 18 expert witnesses, both on the field of freedom of speech, professors, but also people who are very knowledgeable nationally and internationally about Islam and the Quran. And unfortunately, this is really ridiculous. I cannot really explain why, but the court decided that from my request from 18 witnesses, they only allowed 3, and they threw 15 of them away without any reason. So the major part of my defense is to show the public with 18 expert witnesses what I'm talking about and what I said, that it really was the truth. I am now only left with 3 witnesses. Those 3, those few are also questioned behind closed doors.
Yes.
So it's like I feel like I'm being taken to court in some kind of totalitarian country where I cannot be allowed to defend myself in the way I should with as much expert witnesses that I want, and those 3 that are accepted are even heard without the public being able to hear it behind closed doors. So this is what the court decided a few days ago, and this is an enormous setback for me and my defense team.
Is that a very common thing in this country for someone who is trying to defend himself in a court action to have witnesses turned back in such high numbers?
No, this is also, it's a very good question, Bruce, because in cases that are less major than this one, less principal, sometimes a criminal who committed murder or anything is able in the Netherlands to get 15 or 20 expert witnesses. We have had very small cases where 5 or 6 expert witnesses were allowed. So it's even if you look at the Dutch press today, even not only my friends but also my foes, also the people who strongly disagree with me, like professors in law, said that it's very uncommon and a very ununderstandable decision of the court to not allow me the expert witnesses and those 3 that are allowed, even to hear them behind closed doors. So it's not common in Holland, and it's a sign that it's, like I always have said and still are saying now, it's a political trial. It's not a normal trial. It's a political trial that I thought we did not have anymore in the Netherlands for a few centuries. Well, unfortunately, we still have them.
I saw that in today's Volkskrant, there is a small article saying that 6 supposed experts in Islam and in law have sent a letter to the court challenging your interpretation of Islam, and these are people who are apparently experts in Sharia law and Islamology and so forth. Have you seen this letter?
I've seen it, yes. I've seen it.
Yes. What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, like I said, there is a lot of resistance to what I say. I mean, I represent today, if you look at the polls, the biggest party of Holland. But and I'm loved by a lot of people, but it's black or white. There are also a lot of people who hate my guts. So those professors who disagree with me from the beginning are now giving to the court letters and analysis that what I said is wrong, and they make it public. That's why it's so important that I should be allowed to have my own expert witnesses, not only from the Netherlands but also from abroad, that have also studied the Quran, or also knowledgeable in that, and can make the other side, can show the other side of the coin, my side of the coin, which I believe is the truth. So I'm not allowed for them to speak in court, and the opposite party is making public, and all the newspapers in Holland are publishing that are not right. So even in the public arena, it's not a fair play.
How seriously is something like this letter from these supposed experts? How seriously is something like that taken by the court?
Well, I don't know yet. They said that they would going to write a letter every month, I believe, to the court explaining that what I said is wrong and that my defense is wrong. I don't really know how serious the court will take it. But if I look back so far, and the court is not so much interested in what I have to say, or people in my defense have to say, but it's very interested in what the other part has to say. So I'm afraid it could be serious, and that's why I really have to work very strongly in my own defense in other ways than with 3 expert witnesses only that can only speak behind closed doors.
I want to ask you something that's rather personal. What do you think it is about you, Geert Wilders, that brought you to this place? So many other people in powerful positions in politics and business and in the media have chosen not to fight this fight.
Yeah.
What is it in your personal history, your upbringing, your values, your experiences that made you decide that you had to stand up and speak out?
Well, you know, Bruce, I was already when I was a teenager, and I lived for a few years in Israel before I had to go back to Holland to fulfill my military service. That was at that time compulsory and go to study. I saw in the Middle East, I saw what Islam really means, at least societies that are dominated by Islamic culture. And I know they are all different. I visited Iran many times, Syria, Egypt, most of the Middle Eastern countries, and I know that you cannot compare them all completely, but they have one common factor that is dominant, and that this is the Islamic culture, and how they treat people who are kuffars, who are not Muslim, and how they treat freedom, and how they treat homosexuals and women and journalists and everything that has to do with that, and dissidents. And I saw the totalitarian part of the whole region. And at the same time, when I grew up, I was a teenager at that time, in my 20s and my 30s, I saw that we were importing those problems to our own Europe. And that our societies were overflooded with immigrants from exactly those kind of countries, from the Maghreb, from the Middle East, and that we were importing an ideology that was not willing to assimilate or integrate in our societies, but wanted to be dominant and were very little respectful, if not say hateful, of course not all the people, but the ideology against everything that we stand for, freedom, equality, and our own values. And I believe that I'm not for a mono-cultural society, but I believe that our own culture should be dominant, and this is not an Islamic culture. So I saw that, then I became a parliamentarian. I traveled, I studied it, and I thought, well, things have to change. I remember that in the Dutch Parliament in the year of 1999, I just became an MP for my party that I left later. Yes. I put forward a resolution in Parliament in 1999, 2 years before 9/11, and I said, well, Islam is a threat. The government should take it seriously and should study it and take measures against it, and the immigration. And everybody at that time was looking to me, what is this guy talking about? He's a crazy guy, he's a fool, what is he doing? And of course we saw later what happened in Europe, in Madrid, 9/11 of course in New York, but also here in Europe with all the attacks from Madrid to London, in the Netherlands when Theo van Gogh was murdered, slaughtered, and we saw our society change. So I thought, well, I have to stand up. I believe that free people are obliged, they don't only have the right, but they are obliged to stand up if they see that the freedom of them and their children is threatened. I believe our freedom is threatened. Yes. So I have no alternative than to stand up. Of course, at that time I didn't know I would get in so much trouble, security-wise and otherwise, but still I have not 1 second I have had any regret, and I'm still very, very confident that I should continue whatever court cases or things will happen to me.
When you read the newspapers here in the Netherlands, it seems very clear that you don't have very many friends in the media. How much of this country, however, do you feel is behind you?
Well, I think, like I said, a growing amount of people. There is an enormous gap in the Netherlands between the political elite and the vox populi, the voice of the people. And well, if there would be elections today in Holland, according to almost all the polls for already half a year or a year, we would have something between 25 and 30 seats in our 150-seated lower house, which means that there is something between 15 and 20% of the vote. So we are popular, not like a majority of the people, but in 3 years' time, we went from 9 seats in Parliament to an any poll now between 25 and 30 seats in Parliament. So we tripled our popularity today. And this is not only because what my party, the Party for Freedom Party says, but also because of the people are angered that the political elite, the ruling parties in Holland, are still ignoring the problem, are very irresponsible, are only talking about the good sides of Islam and things like that. So I believe that a growing amount of people, fortunately, is supporting it, and at the same time, the more that we grow in popularity, the more our enemies become nasty as well. But I'm afraid it's part of the game.
Yes. Here in Europe, we've seen major acts of terrorism in cities like London and Madrid. We've seen debates about Sharia law in Britain. We've seen debates about burqas in especially France, riots in the suburbs of France, cartoon riots in Denmark, and so forth. But in a sense, it seems as if the Netherlands has somehow become the center for this controversy, for this conflict. I mean, we've seen the murder of Pim Fortuyn. We've seen the murder of Theo. We've seen the hounding and harassment and tormenting of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And now you. What is it about the Netherlands that is there something special about this country that has made it the epicenter of this?
Well, you know, in Holland, in the past, we were applauded, at least the government was applauded by the Germans, by the Belgians, by many, because we have such a consensus-like society, which, according to some, had a lot of advantages. But one of the big disadvantages was that if you want to make a law in Holland, it will take you years, not only because of the lawmaking process, because it's our history and attitude that you have to agree with everybody. We are a multi-party system. Besides parliament and government, everybody has to take a piece of the cake and has to agree on it. And don't forget that the leftist party, who were ruling, and even today for almost all the time since the Second World War, those parties invented the multicultural society in Holland. They were the founding fathers of all these problems we have today, and they are very not eager to admit their mistake. And they are also politically more depending every moment on the immigrant vote in the Netherlands. So the combination of that made very certain that the cultural relativism, the idea that cultures are equal, which I believe is a very big misconception, became very dominant, and it's very difficult to change anything. And I hoped that after those terrible things you mentioned, also the murders in the Netherlands and how Ayaan Hirsi Ali was treated, that something would change. But it did amongst the people, but it did not in the political elite. So there are also many other countries, like look at the United Kingdom, look at Germany, look at France, look at Denmark, where they have problems and they don't have all the solutions either. But we are almost paralyzed by acting because the ruling parties invented this whole scheme of multiculturalism, invited all those people in the last decade to emigrate to the Netherlands, are depending politically on all the elections on the vote of those people, and this paralyzes us. And I believe that the majority of the public is being fed up with that, and this is one of the reasons that my party is so popular today. And this makes the Netherlands special. We are, and I believe in a bad way, grown on consensus, and we are tolerant to everybody, even to the intolerant, and I believe we should never stop being tolerant to the tolerant, but we should start getting tolerant to the intolerant, also in our country. And unfortunately, we are not, at least the Dutch government is not.
Well, apropos of that, I was very, very struck yesterday by an opinion piece that I read, and I think it was in the Volkskrant, by I think it was some professor, whose very argument was that Geert Wilders is trying to talk about the truth of Islam, but the whole Dutch social contract, as it were, is based on the idea for centuries that we are not supposed to look at the truth about each other's religions. And it was a remarkable argument. It was an absolutely breathtaking argument to read in a paper in the 21st century in the Western world. And I did feel that it was something distinctly Dutch. It was a distinctly Dutch argument. And so I understand what you're talking about there. What would you say to people in other countries, in other European countries, in America, in Canada, other democracies around the world, if they said to you that this trial here in the Netherlands doesn't concern them?
Well, it does concern them. What I always say is, I'm now, if you look at the TV and everything, I'm the victim, but it's not about me. This trial is really not about me. This trial is about freedom of speech and is about whether we accept an ideology full of hatred that goes against everything that we stand for. If we want to have a rule of law and a civil society and freedom for all of us. And now in the Netherlands today, a parliamentarian, it's me, but it could be anybody else in any other country in the future, is being charged by speaking the truth and by using his freedom of speech and warning and fighting for the freedom of my country and of our freedom. And if I would be convicted in the Netherlands, then I strongly believe that the freedom that we so pamper in our society will be turned back for at least a century, if not 2 centuries. And if that happens to me, it can happen to anybody else, because the multiculturalists, the cultural relativists, but also the people, the Islamic ideology will have gained enormous ground. If they could silence somebody, in my case a democratically elected politician, by not being able to criticize an ideology. I mean, I wish we had some kind of American First Amendment, but I believe it's also starting in the United States. And what I would say to people in Europe, but also in the United States and Canada, is that don't think it won't happen to you. Don't think that freedom will be eternal for you. I quoted in the first public court session Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd President of the United States, who once said that the price of freedom is an eternal vigilance. And this is what we also always should remember, that if we don't stand up and fight for our freedom, and once again, it's not only our right, but our duty to fight for freedom, and if we don't see Islam for what it really is and what it really intends to establish, which is a non-free society dominated by Islam, then our countries will change, and we will lose everything that we have ever fought for, that our fathers and grandfathers fought for. So for Europe it's very important, but also I believe for the United States it's important not to lose the European ally, and not to see, as some people have stated, that Europe will change in the future in some kind of non-free, like Bawer, my dear friend Bawer said, some kind of Eurasia with totally different values. And what can happen in Europe can also happen to the United States, even though in the United States people have the First Amendment. Everything can be changed. And so my fight is not my personal fight, but is a fight that I believe goes for every free man and woman in the world who wants their own values to be there, amongst which freedom and freedom of speech and freedom of expression and equality for also the next centuries to come.
Thank you very much, Geert, for giving me your time and for your eloquence and your courage.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.